Good evening. You're watching The Big Story with Haryanto Duman. I'm Olivia Quay. If you're watching us on YouTube, please subscribe to the Straits Times channel if you haven't already done so.
Singapore reported 0 new Singaporean and permanent resident patients among the 373 new COVID-19 cases today. The last time there were no new cases among citizens or PRs was on February 23rd, which was also the last time there were no new cases reported here.
Foreign workers living in dormitories continue to form the bulk of the remaining cases. Today's count takes the total number of cases here to 33,249, and more details will be released later tonight.
In other news, mosques here will reopen progressively from June 2nd, starting with the provision of limited spaces for private prayer. But the Islamic Religious Council of Singapore said congregational and Friday prayers remain suspended until further notice. From June 2nd to 7th, mosques will open for limited operating hours between 1 p.m. and 6 p.m. And from June 8th, most mosques will allow individual worship for the 5 daily prayers.
Meanwhile, China will soon relax its border controls for Singapore and several countries, allowing certain categories of people to travel to some cities. Chinese state media reported today that domestic and foreign airlines will be able to apply for green channels for chartered flights to airports in the mainland. So far, the countries given the green light are Singapore, Japan, Britain, Germany, France, Italy and Switzerland.
Similarly, Singapore and New Zealand will start discussing the safe and gradual reopening of borders following a virtual meeting between Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong and his New Zealand counterpart Jacinda Ardern. Such green lane arrangements between both countries would see the restoration of connectivity as well as facilitation of short-term essential business and official travel. This comes as New Zealand's last COVID-19 patient was discharged from hospital yesterday.
HDB will extend the grace period of 20 minutes for short-term parking until the end of Phase 1 of Singapore's safe reopening. This affects all HDB and URA EPS car parks. In a Facebook post today addressing #HomeDeliveryHeroes, HDB said it hopes this helps with your deliveries for food, groceries and other goods.
Moving on, in the Fortitude Budget announced 2 days ago, the government will give a new cash grant to offset more of the rental costs of small and medium-sized enterprises. It will be disbursed by the Inland Revenue Authority of Singapore to landlords from end July. Landlords are required to pass this on to their SME tenants.
How much of a reprieve does this mean for SMEs? Let's discuss this further with the President of the Association of Small and Medium Enterprises, Kurt Wee. Welcome, Kurt. So, give us a little context first, leading up to the announcement of this cash grant. A section of the COVID-19 Temporary Measures Bill passed on April the 7th requires the property owner to pass on the full amount of property tax rebate attributable to a rented property to his tenant in a timely manner. Despite this law, though, were most landlords not providing rental relief to their tenants? Are you able to give some examples?
Sure. So, first you saw the retail F&B, the frontline businesses in January and February seeing a steep decline in their turnover and sales, 60 to 80%, so many of them. And, the government announced in the first 2 budget various series of help for SMEs, including tax rebate through the institutional landlords equivalent to about 1.2 months of rental rebate that's supposed to be passed down to the SME tenants and the tenants, operating tenants at large. Unfortunately, what happened on the ground was there was a huge tussle that came on between the landlords and the tenants. Landlords thought that they could give the rebates with conditions in the way they want to, but the SMEs were struggling. They were running out of cash flow and they needed the rebates fast and furious because they were hit fast and furious. So there was a lot of tussle on the ground on the rental rebate issue, and finally the government had to step in and legislate that the rental rebate is mandatory. The landlord have to pass the rental rebate in full to the tenants. without imposing any conditions. That still brought quite a lot of confusion, and the ground still needed a lot of clarity. And I think even right up to now, landlords are saying that they're still waiting for IRAS to send them the money, and then they can do the accounting and give the rental rebates to the tenants. So I think, first of all, the budget is right in issuing help in terms of rental costs to the operating tenants, because for the operating tenants, they saw a steep decline in their sales. And the bulk of their costs fall in manpower and rental and some other operating costs as well. So manpower, they've got the job support scheme to sort of cushion the manpower costs, not completely, but substantially, especially during the circuit breaker where everybody has 75% manpower subsidy. Then if you look at the last few months, the heavy impact really happened for February, March, April, and May. And April, May are basically circuit breaker months, right? And even for June, businesses are really gonna only be able to go in the slow gear on the start. Not everybody can open. So you're looking at about 5 months of, very, very severe, heavy impact for all these operating tenants. Right. And so the rental rebate becomes a component that is so important in supporting them with their costs. And I think, we're very grateful that the government have been spot on in the Fortitude Budget. In summary, there'll be 2 months of government backed rental rebates for operating tenants, and then there'll be 2 further months that has been proposed for landlords to actually issue to the operating tenants as well. So in total, for the SME commercial operators, they'll get a total of 4 months of rental rebate. Now, I have to sort of bring everybody back to the ground, because 4 months sounds like a lot, but really it's a very brutal battle this first half of the year. And I think the rental rebates that's been given out, the job support scheme that's gone out to support wages, all these basically only help the SMEs to sort of put into context the massive loss of business that they've experienced in this first half of the year. And having some of these assistance schemes that will help them cushion that impact. The SMEs basically still have the second half of the year to battle. And we are telling the SMEs that don't try to rush into opening. Focus on what you need to do as far as your social distancing, your health and safety measures are concerned, because that is really, really important as a fundamental first step to a restarting. So, but the rental rebates are something which I think the government will make some further announcements next week. And I think there'll be clearer legislative steps on that.
And of course, Kurt, apart from that as well, you mentioned about next week, and a new bill will also be introduced next week as well that mandates landlords contribute by granting a rental waiver to the SME tenants who have suffered a significant revenue drop in the past few months, like you mentioned. Now, this bill plus the cash grant, have these announcements already triggered landlords to take action to help their tenants?
Well, I think it's legislated help, so I don't think it's triggered. I think if you look at the how motivated the landlords are, in the first, second, and third budget, really we saw quite proactive landlords like Far East and city developments also announced some measures on their own. Those measures were announced even in the absence of all these government legislated help that SMEs should receive. So I think what's important is also, I think, to really appreciate what Ministry of Law issued as the COVID-19 Temporary Relief Bill that sort of legislate actions against SME tenants if they are affected by COVID and if they're unable to pay their rent. these have helped a lot of businesses basically hold off actions against them due COVID. And, it gives businesses breathing space. It gives businesses time to regroup, take stock of all the assistance measures they have, and then look at, how they're going to pivot, how they're going to remain viable, and how they're going to face the second half of the year. And I think the Ministry of Law, the government basically will announce next week some further legislation on these rental rebates. I think some of these announcements that will happen will bring clarity to the ground as far as the rental rebates are concerned. It will take away the confusion, and hopefully it will also have a very easy to implement framework. I think there will be likely still some confusion or some lack of information, but I think that probably hopefully will be the minority, and I'm sure there'll be a process to sort those cases out.
Right. Well, Kurt, I want to move away from the issue of rents and rental waivers. Now, SMEs contribute to 65% of Singapore's employment. So through reskilling, digitizing, and other measures put in place, how confident are you that SMEs can retain their employees by the time we emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic?
So, you've lost a part of your large chunk majority of your traditional business, right? So you've got to pivot the way you used to do things. If you pivot to try and carve in new forms of revenue. So a lot of businesses have gone ahead and accelerated their move towards digital payments, digital transactions, and then how they can market online digitally. But at the same time, they are also finding that there is also a price to pay. F&B operators are paying 25-35% for food delivery apps to basically deliver their food to the customers. And but I think the whole ecosystem is still in the process of adjusting to the new order. And post circuit breaker business will not be the same. It won't just not be the same for the short term. I think it will be different for at least 12-18 months, because COVID is not going away. So businesses have to basically look at, okay, how much of the old turnover they have left, and what are the new ways they can pivot to basically generate new forms of revenue, whether it's through digital marketing, outreach. I think for the non-domestic businesses, what is important is, besides digitalizing, besides transforming yourself even further, there's a real need to think about how we're going to breach into bigger demand pool, because that's really what's lacking. You can do all the transformation and digitalization, but you've got to be able to stimulate that demand for your goods and services. I think that's something that I think hopefully we can develop some better strategies in those regards.
Yeah. Now, Kurt, before we wrap up this interview, we just want to venture to another separate topic as well. Business groups and trade associations said yesterday that reducing the number of migrant workers here will hurt Singapore's economic recovery and harm Singaporeans' job prospects. They were responding to recent calls to restrict the number of foreign workers. What's your take on that?
I think, it's this is a hot, sensitive subject, and I think there isn't enough sufficient appreciation of the actual need for the foreign workforce that contributes to this economy. I think it's very easy for people to say, hey, we have too many, we don't need so many. But the question begs as well, then who's going to do some of these jobs? Because there aren't enough Singaporeans that is trained in certain sectors. Construction sectors, for example, right? For generations, at least for about 2 generations, Singaporeans have not been participating in such jobs. And I think any change in the local and foreign work population regime needs to be tweaked very slowly and very carefully, so that the impact is smoothened, and we get more plus rather than minuses. The truth of the fact is not about businesses not willing to hire locals. It's really a question of the availability of that capability, or that willingness to take on some of those jobs. And I think, businesses have already worked over the last 8-9 years with a very tight foreign manpower policy. And, they are trying to adjust, but over the last 8-9 years, I do want to remind everybody that, businesses have been facing higher costs, and eventually higher costs leads to higher consumer prices and living costs as well. So I think we've got to take a balanced approach when we look at this. I think, we are past the stage whereby we have housing or transportation bottlenecks and all that. I think those issues have been sorted out. I think the situation has improved over the years, and I would hesitate to look at any kind of drastic change in this regard.
Well, thank you so much, Kurt. Great insights there, and of course, thank you for joining us today. We've been speaking to Kurt Wee, President of the Association of Small and Medium Enterprises.
And so, while Singapore edges closer to the end of the circuit breaker and into the 3 phases of recovery, new challenges certainly lie ahead. Join the Straits Times senior health correspondent Salma Khalik and a panel of experts for a very special edition of The Big Story at 5:30 p.m. tomorrow.
They'll discuss what we can expect in the coming weeks and months, as well as the potential pain points and pitfalls that could delay a new normal. Let's go to Dylan Ang for headlines around the world.
Thanks, guys. In the United States, the coronavirus death toll has passed 100,000. In the span of just 3 months, more Americans have died from COVID-19 than the Korean War, Vietnam War, and US conflict in Afghanistan combined. On average, about 1,400 Americans died each day of this month. There are currently over 1.7 million COVID-19 cases nationwide. South Korea reported 79 new coronavirus cases today, the most since early April. It is also the 3rd straight day infections have risen, prompting further speculation of a second wave of the virus. At least 69 cases this week have been linked to a cluster of infections at a logistics facility. This cluster appears linked to an earlier outbreak that emerged in several clubs and bars in Seoul earlier this month. The English Premier League revealed there have been 4 more COVID-19 cases at 3 clubs. This makes 12 positive cases from a total of 2,752 tests taken since players and staff started being examined earlier this month. Yesterday, Premier League clubs voted to return to contact training, a significant step towards restarting the league in June. That's all for our global updates. Back to you guys.
The circuit breaker ends in a few days, and questions continue to pour into the Straits Times Ask ST column on what is allowed and not allowed in Phase 1 of Singapore's safe reopening.
First up, if you're wondering whether you can visit your friend or partner from June 2nd, the answer is no. You are only allowed to visit your grandparents and parents if they're living elsewhere, or your parents-in-law and grandparents-in-law, but this is only limited to 2 visitors once a day, and the visitors must also come from the same household.
Can I go for a staycation with my family at a hotel? No, you can't. Hotel staycations remain disallowed in Phase 1. Many hotels are also still supporting the accommodation needs of healthcare workers, students, and foreign workers affected by travel restrictions.
And last question, can my home renovation works that were disrupted restart from June 2nd? Yes, they can. On Tuesday, Minister for National Development Lawrence Wong said in Parliament that renovations for HDB flats and private homes that were disrupted will get priority to restart. All companies intending to restart will have to seek approval from the Building and Construction Authority and show documents like photos and contractual agreements as proof. Minister Wong added that the government will consider allowing new home renovation projects to proceed earlier if contractors can show that appropriate measures are in place.
More detailed answers are in the description below if you're watching us on YouTube. If you have any other questions, send them to askst@sph.com.sg.
Going back to what we just covered in Ask ST, suspended renovations have put some homeowners who bought homes before the circuit breaker in limbo as they are unsure of when the work can restart and subsequently when they can move in as well.
One such homeowner is Mr. Bruno Tay, who joins us now to share his experience. Bruno, we understand renovation works are underway for your new place. They were originally slated to complete this month but are now delayed due to the circuit breaker. Even with the recent announcement that suspended renovation works can resume, you are probably looking at another 3 months before you can move into the new place. Could you give us a brief rundown of events so far?
Yes, sure. I was slated, as you mentioned, I was slated to move in the middle of May. We started renovations in my house, in my new place, in January, and I think around April when the CB was announced, I think the contractors and we literally had only 2 days to prep up to close up everything. And it was a big rush to do so. We did it in April, and then the first COVID measures, the first CB was announced, and then we thought it was a month, but again, it got extended by another month, so there was a 2-month delay. And I think only the last 48 hours ago, there was a BCA did release some documentation pertaining to when we can reopen and when the contractors could start applying back to begin work on the renovations.
Right. So, Bruno, how does it affect you and your family? Is it just a matter of inconvenience having your renovations pushed back by 2 months now?
It's not so much a matter of inconvenience. I mean, I guess all of Singapore is doing the same thing, right? Number one is that it's pushed back by 2 months, but the likelihood of it being only 2 months, looking at all the measures to take note of and looking at what BCA requirements are needed, plus the safety measures for workers, etc. I think it would be much longer than the 2 months, frankly. So that does add a lot of inconvenience to us in terms of when we're supposed to move out, as we are paying a mortgage on a new property, but at the same time we are also paying again for the property I currently live in. So there's cost to be considered as well.
Yeah. Right. Well, the suspended works don't just affect you and your family. Presumably, whoever bought your current place can't move in as well since you haven't moved out. So could you share more on how you've had to manage all these moving parts?
I guess this is, I guess I won't be the only one having this issue. I mean, as I said, I was supposed to move in May. That means that I was supposed to leave this current property in May as well. And the new owners were supposed to move in, or at least renovate this present place in at least towards the end of May. And I guess that affects me as the owner, it affects the new owner, and it also affects the owner of the other owner. So I think there are 3 owners at least affected in this, because you do know it's a trickle-down effect.
Yeah, definitely. There's a trickling down effect. So what's next for you, Bruno? Do you know exactly when renovations for your new home will resume?
I'm actually, as I said earlier, right, the BCA only released, I think, some of the documentations and processes in the last 48 hours or so. So I'm having a call with my architects and the contractors tomorrow morning, and that's as far as I know, right? But looking at the run through of the documents so far, I think it's really by a process of, I think us as owners, we have to fill in some forms, contractors have to fill in some forms. We have to submit it all to the BCA first for approvals, and that's really one of the first things to do.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Bruno, for taking time to speak with us, and certainly we wish you all the best. Now, we were speaking to Mr. Bruno Tay, a homeowner affected by the suspended renovation works due to the circuit breaker.
Perhaps you're in the same boat. We want to hear from you, so leave your comments below. Let's go back to Dylan for what's also in the news.
In the strongest hint by a minister to date about the upcoming general election, Deputy Prime Minister Heng Swee Keat said that the sooner it is held, the earlier we can rally everybody together to deal with COVID-19. In an interview with CNA, Mr. Heng said Singapore's economy faces significant challenges over the next 5 to 10 years and that an early election would be favourable to allow Singaporeans to emerge stronger from the pandemic. He also mentioned the fact that other countries have held elections under difficult circumstances, citing the record turnout in South Korea's recent election. Singtel posted a 25.7% drop in profit to $574.4 million for its fourth quarter, which ended on March 31st. This is down from $773 million last year. Singtel's board also proposed a final ordinary dividend of 5.45 cents per share, almost half the 10.7 cents per share a year ago. This will bring the total dividend per share for the year to 12.25 cents, down from 17.5 cents a year earlier. US President Donald Trump is set to sign an executive order on social media companies today. This comes after he threatened to shut down websites he accused of stifling conservative voices. No further details have been given, and it is unclear how Mr. Trump could shut down privately owned companies such as Twitter. The move appears to have been prompted by a dispute that flared up on Tuesday after Twitter added fact-check links to Mr. Trump's tweets. That's all we have for what's also in the news. I'm Dylan Ang.
Thank you, Dylan. Now, a lot of things have been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, but one major challenge, possibly the biggest challenge for fresh graduates, would be finding a job. 20-year-old Dian Afiqah Salaihuddin had planned to get a full-time job after graduation so she could save up for university.
But due to the pandemic, companies weren't hiring and Dian couldn't extend her internship either. Then her mother lost her job in March and her father stopped working at a gym because of the circuit breaker measures. She joins us now to share her story. Hi Dian. Now Dian, you graduated this month. Describe your feelings then, after graduation, knowing that you have difficulty finding a job.
So once I graduated, I decided that I was going to work first to save up money to go to uni. Then at that time, I didn't really know what path I wanted to take in life, so I was a little indecisive when choosing full-time jobs. Then I was going with roles that I was familiar with, like because of my diploma, I was going for roles like production assistant and even some stuff like receptionist. Then the goal for me at that time was to save money, basically. But then once I started going into job sites, then there weren't many availabilities, or jobs were being taken down faster than those that were being posted, and some didn't even respond to me. So I honestly felt at that time that I was being left behind, or I wasn't advancing as well as I wanted to. I looked at others and started comparing myself to those who had jobs or who were continuing their intern. Then I was staying at home more than I was going out, and that was before the lockdown. I felt very disappointed in myself, especially when I knew that I needed to get money. There were times when I didn't even want to get up and face the day because I knew it would end up with rejection from jobs. Thankfully, my mom introduced this temp job to me.
Right. Well, thanks so much for sharing that, Dian. No, you have a diploma from Singapore Polytechnic in creative writing for TV and new media. So I just was wondering, what were your original plans before the pandemic?
Before the pandemic, as any usual student would do, they would want to go get a grad trip first before starting work. But that didn't go well because we weren't allowed to travel. So my friends and I couldn't go for a grad trip. But that's okay. I already knew that I wanted to work right after I graduated. But what I wasn't sure of was what I wanted to do as a long-term job or like a profession. So I have a go with the flow kind of attitude, and I honestly didn't manage to plan that much. So I went with what I like to do. So I have interest in the media and art, so I thought that I could go down that direction, but I was also open to new industries. I realized that I had some interest in teaching after I graduated and started looking at some uni courses that I could take. but I wasn't sure what full-time job I wanted to take. And also there weren't that many availabilities, which led me to the path of taking part-time jobs or temp jobs first.
Now, Dian, we understand your mother recently found a part-time job as well. Now, before that though, you were your family's sole breadwinner for 6 weeks. How was that? Could you describe that for us?
My mom was the one that found this job for me, so I'm very grateful to her for this. My family, even though we are very big, is full of hardworking people. Even before this pandemic, I was already working to provide for myself, but providing for the family is different. My parents being out of commission came suddenly, but being able to adapt is like one of my strong suits. And as an older sister and more importantly, a member of the family, I was more than happy to help out my family and to kind of pay back my parents for everything they've done, for the hard work that they contributed in their work for the past years.
Well, thank you so much, Dian, for sharing your story, and certainly we wish you and your family the very best. That was Dian Afiqah Salaihuddin.
And just another reminder to catch a special edition of The Big Story at 5:30 p.m. tomorrow. Senior Health Correspondent Salma Khalik is joined by a panel of experts to look ahead to the 3 phases of recovery for Singapore.
They'll discuss what we can expect in the coming weeks and months, as well as the potential pain points and pitfalls that could delay a new normal. Don't forget to tune in.
In the meantime, for more news and videos, visit straitstimes.com and subscribe to our YouTube channel by clicking the red button below.
Once again, I'm Haryanto Diman with Olivia Kui. Join us tomorrow for more stories on The Big Story.